Hi again then guys, and welcome to another best of list on Gran Turismo 6, and this particular list, due to the nature of it, is not going to be a countdown from 10 to 1, best to worst or anything like that in a traditional way, because the cars within this list are just so different from each other in many ways that it wouldn't be fair to do that. They're all great in their own way and they're all useful and have one particular thing that ties them all together. And of course you'll have seen that from the title, and that is the fact that all of these vehicles are, regardless of engine placement, be it front, middle or rear, but they are all rear-wheel drive. Now we will also be covering front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive vehicles, but for now it's rear-wheel drive. And there are so many good rear-wheel drive cars on Gran Turismo that by definition, when you narrow it down to a 25 best of, there are definitely going to be loved cars that aren't featured. That's just the nature of a list. So there are definitely cars which are great, which didn't quite make it into my top 25, and as with all of my best of lists, this is not just for the quickest cars, it's for the cars which have great value, great handling, they're highly usable, they're cars which when you buy them, you can get a lot of use out of them. They're not just one-trick ponies that you'll never use again. And incidentally, we will not be featuring any track-only or racing vehicles on this list, simply because you could make a whole 25 list purely of Le Mans cars, so there's just no point in doing that. We're sticking to road vehicles and also concept cars, so let's get straight into it. Kicking us off first of all is the Suzuki GSXR 4, one of the few cars on Gran Turismo to be powered by a motorcycle engine, a Suzuki GSXR or GSXR engine, and this car is one of the best seasonal event vehicles you can find. It's nearly unbeatable within its own PP range. It's a definite must-have for any player on Gran Turismo, and for a rear-wheel drive model, it's a great choice. Next up, I'm including a totally different vehicle, but a brilliant one in its own right again, the Pontiac Trans Am. It's the cheapest muscle car in the game, along with a couple of others at 30,000 credits exactly, and for that, you get incredible all-round ability. It's a full premium with some pretty impressive visual upgrades. It can do around 260 miles per hour, or even more with nitrous. The handling is surprisingly good, and all of that for 30 grand. It's quite simply one of the best muscle cars in the game, and I would say one of the best rear-wheel drive cars in the game. Next up, I'm putting a car which you don't see used as much as some of the others on this list, but it's a very good one, the Honda or Acura HSC concept. At 750 grand, it is pretty expensive, but for that you get a vehicle with similar numbers to a Honda NSX R, but with a significant advantage in straight line performance in particular. The handling is still superb, it's a great looking car, it's extremely quick for its power, and it's just a great all-round machine. Next up, I'm including another vehicle which has been featured in my countdown videos before because it is so good. The Dome Zero, one of the best concept cars in the game, one of the best classic cars in the game. For its power, it's extremely fast in a straight line, and although at 500,000 credits it is pretty expensive, like the GSXR4 from Suzuki, it's just a brilliant PP specific and seasonal event racer. Next up, we move into decidedly more exotic and unique territory with the road version of Nissan's R390. Many people know and love the Honda NSX R LM road car as being one of the quickest exotic road cars in the game, but far less people think of the R390. It's just as quick as the NSX in a straight line, and although the handling isn't necessarily quite as good, this is still very much a race car for the road, in a literal sense. Next up, we return again to a car which we've visited before in these countdowns, like the Dome Zero, another classic Japanese concept, the Mazda RX500. The same price as the Dome Zero at 500,000 credits, and again, it's remarkably quick for its power, so much so that many people won't even allow you to use this car in some public lobbies. Next up, a vehicle which is massively popular and superb value for money, and has one of the highest PP levels of any road car in the game, the Viper ACR. 100 grand gets you well over 1100 horsepower, around 300 miles per hour, and the trackability which can literally take on GT1 cars and LMPs. I actually use this car in career mode to beat Le Mans prototypes regularly. Now the AI of course isn't as quick as some real people, but it just goes to show how useful this road car can be. Next up, another highly popular PP specific choice of vehicle, but one with more of a cult following than something like a Dome Zero. This is less obvious and a little less known. It's the Toyota FT86 G Sports. It's very expensive for what it is, but for 500 to 550 pp, it manages to have the performance of something like a GTR at that level, but in a much more compact layout. Next up, I've put a vehicle which, again, I've featured before in countdown lists, and it's one which not many people are a fan of, but the reason why I'm featuring it is because it's an undervalued gem, the Isuzu Piazza. It's a tiny, low PP, cheap, not necessarily attractive looking vehicle, but for the 450 pp level it can do around 200 miles per hour. That's remarkably quick, and although it can be beaten, it's a brilliant all-round vehicle for lower PP, straight-line biased racing. Next up, a much more obvious choice for a top rear-wheel drive list, the NSX R from Honda. This is a remarkable street car, similar power, as we said, to the HSC concept, but far cheaper. The NSX is a brilliant car in all forms, but the Type R, in premium form especially, is just a brilliant vehicle. And around certain tracks like the Nürburgring Ring, it can literally take on, and in many cases outright beat, actual race cars. Next up, keeping it in the JDM family, we move to another massively popular car, but unlike the NSX, this is more loved for its straight line performance on Gran Turismo, and that's the Supra. In particular the RZ, it's dirt cheap, has massive power levels, and the straight line performance can give literally any supercar in the game a fantastic run for its money. Around the track it's not quite as sharp as some other vehicles, especially in fully tuned form, but it's still a fantastic all-round choice of rear-wheel drive car. Next up, we revisit another modern muscle car that we've talked about a couple of times on the channel, the dirt cheap, and I really mean dirt cheap, Chevy Camaro SS. This is a personal favourite, underappreciated model of mine. For such a cheap price, you get a car which can outrun most other muscle cars, even the newer Camaro and the newer Dodge Challenger, quite easily in a straight line, and around the track, despite the fact that it's a little big and bloated looking, it's deceptively good. Next up, we pay a visit to the truck category on Gran Turismo, and if you're talking rear-wheel drive trucks, nothing comes close to how good this one is, the Toyota Tacoma. This is a remarkable vehicle. It's such a big, cumbersome looking car with a dirt cheap price that actually turns out to be one of the best rear-wheel drive cars in the game. You've got 700 horsepower, it's lighter than it looks, makes an excellent drift car, it's fast in a straight line, and it will shock people around a track. Next up, one of the most obvious choices of the list, and another car which I've really paid many respects to in various lists on the channel, the C7 Corvette Stingray. In particular, the normal Stingray I would place above the likes of the GT concept and the Black Mask version, because it offers the same advantages as those cars, but for a much cheaper price. 51 grand is ridiculously cheap for any vehicle that's as good as this one is. I'm a huge Corvette fan, and the C7 manages to take the Corvette beyond just being a purely mechanical sports car into GTR rivaling territory. Next up, another car which we featured very recently in another top 10 video, the very popular BMW M4. It doesn't really matter if you go for the pace car or the normal model, because they're essentially the same in everything but visuals. It's one of the most powerful sports cars in the game with 1000 horsepower, has surprisingly good handling for a vehicle that is so powerful, of course makes an excellent drift car, and for 120 grand really does have great value for money. Next up, we move again into ultimate exotic territory with the 1 million credit Ferrari Enzo, named after the founder of the company, and this is one of the most popular supercars pretty much in any game that it's featured on. The Enzo is a brilliant straight line machine, and although the handling, like the FXX, can be a little temperamental, overall I would actually say that the Enzo is a little smoother and more beginner friendly than the FXX, and can certainly give any of the other cars on this list a fantastic run for their money, both in a straight line and certainly around corners. Speaking of cornering, we move to another car which is insanely quick around the track, the light car company Rocket. Superb fuel economy, pretty cheap considering how fast it is, totally unique visuals, and in a straight line the performance really is monstrous for a car with such a tiny amount of power to work with. This car was of course designed by the same guy, Gordon Murray, who developed the McLaren F1, so it's not really a surprise that it's brilliant. It's kind of the McLaren F1 of the tiny sports car world. Speaking of McLarens, we move into the McLaren dealership with the MP412C. A car which I've never been a fan of, to be honest, but it has to be said that on Gran Turismo this is a brilliant vehicle. It manages to be an affordable supercar at 225 grand with incredible straight line performance. The handling can easily outrun most of the other supercars in the game, and it's really just that, a brilliant all-round vehicle. Next up, we consider a vehicle which I discussed earlier on a little in this video, the LM road car version, which is a fictional vehicle of the Honda NSX R. This is a remarkably good road car, probably one of the most respected road cars in the game. It's monstrously fast, and although the top speed requires a little bit more specific tuning to get the best out of, if you do, for the price, it really is a monster. Next up, we return to the classic car category with another vehicle that I've spoken highly of on the channel before, the original Lamborghini Countach. This car is brilliant for PP racing. The handling is so much better than you'd ever think a classic Lamborghini would be, and although its straight line performance is remarkably good as well, that's not really why people tend to use it. It's purely because it is such a good track car. Next up, we return to a more specialised category, a bit like with the Toyota Tacoma, this time the Super Saloon class, with what is most definitely the best all-round four-door car in the game, the Mercedes C63. This is quite simply the most powerful and the fastest straight-line four-door car in the game, and around the track, the fact that it is also a little more compact than many of the other four-door cars really gives it the edge. It's also cheaper than many of the other cars on this list, and although it's not quite as nimble as some, it's definitely a very strong choice of rear-wheel drive vehicle. Next up, we return to the JDM world again for one of my personal favourite JDM cars, the FD RX7. In particular, I would say the Bathurst in premium form. For 40 grand, you get quite simply a brilliant car. It's not quite as powerful as Skylines or Supras, but it's still as quick as Skylines in a straight line, especially for top-end performance, and the handling can easily outmaneuver a Supra and give easily any GTR a run for its money. The RX-7 is a little bit more of a professional driver's machine than some of the other more forgiving JDM cars, but overall, it's pretty much great at everything. We return now again to the exotic category, this time an American exotic, the widely loved and famously Kaz himself's favourite car, the Ford GT. This is a monster. For around 150 grand, you've got some of the best straight-line performance in the game, easily on par with the likes of Vipers and Veyrons, and the handling is deceptively good. It's not necessarily the most beginner-friendly of vehicles, but if you tune it correctly, it has a fantastic mix of monstrous straight-line speed and also track-going handling. Our second to last pick returns again to the JDM category for a vehicle which is known a little bit more as a drag car than it is a track car, the Nissan 300ZX. This is the premium model, and it really is a monster in a straight line. Around the track, it's not really as well known or respected. people tend to go for more obvious choices of Skyline, etc. But this is a deceptively good car. Even in fully tuned form with well over 800 horsepower, it can actually corner and handle itself surprisingly well. It also makes a really good drift car and can even go off-road if you're so inclined. And last but most definitely not least, I'm putting the TVR Carrera Speed 12. This car really only has one downside, and that's the fact that the top speed is inexplicably far slower than all of its rivals. Apart from that though, the acceleration is among the quickest in the game, the value for money and sheer power for the price is remarkable, and with the right tuning, this really can be a force to be reckoned with around the track. But that's it overall for my top 25 best rear-wheel drive cars that every GT player should check out. And which ones do you love? Be sure to slap those down in the comments below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.